Think about all the biggest, high-stake moments in anime and TV dramas that you have seen. Think about Goku in one fight that's going to decide the fate of the entire planet. Think about moments like in Doctor Who, where there's basically this big old bomb Davros has that will destroy every individual atom of the universe if the Doctor doesn't stop him. What if I told you there was a manga where the flip of a single card in a game of rock, paper, scissors felt like it had more weight and stakes on it than both of those moments combined? Hi, I'm JW Alistar from Hell and High Tales. Here is my anime ramble session, number 2, about Kaiji Part 1. Obviously. While conceptually, One Life is objectively less high stakes than an entire planet or an entire universe, the legendary gambling manga Kaiji manages to make each of its gambles, each of its turns in a game, feel like there is more weight, more stakes, and more emotional value than works that are just objectively higher stakes. There are times where Kaiji drawing the right card is more emotional and stressful to read than finding out whether a character in another manga or another show dies. Everything from the execution, to the arts, to the emotions of the characters, to the way they are drawn to reflect those emotions, to the dialogue and the actions that take place in between, does everything it physically can to drive home the emotions of everything you are reading. There are numerous things that make Kaiji great, but one of those things is Kaiji himself, our lovely pointy-nosed protagonist. The series does everything it can to make sure at the beginning of part 1 in a few pages you know Kaiji is an absolute loser. He sucks, he's a failure, and all of it is his own fault. He makes dumb decisions, and now he's paying consequences for it, and it sucks because he doesn't have any skills to possibly get him out of it. And then, to make matters worse, not only has he ruined his own life by being an idiot, he co-signed for another idiot who never paid off a loan, and that loan was to essentially the Yakuza with absurd interest, and now that debt is his. So now he's quadruple screwed. And he essentially gets convinced and roped into gambling to fix all the problems that he started by gambling and being stupid. The beauty of this, and a lot of things that happen in Kaiji, is nothing is ever just because Kaiji's getting screwed over, but nothing is entirely because he's an idiot either. It's always both. He's the kind of dude that's constantly getting himself into trouble and constantly ruining everything for himself, but at the same time he's also constantly getting screwed over by other people. So it's everything working against him. It is the definition of a tragedy. He's in a world that is out to get him, but he's also getting himself far more than the world ever could. So this dude basically ends up on a boat. It starts out with him having to borrow even more money, and he either has to win this gamble, which will erase all the debts that he's accumulated so far in his life, and end up with a lot of money on top of it, or he's going to be forced into hard work labor and human experimentation. Kaiji at this point has done nothing but show us that he loses a lot. We see that he doesn't have money and that his plan to move and get rich gambling failed, and we start out seeing him lose in a game of cards. So he's clearly not some Yugi, Mary Sue kind of character. He sucks. And he just put himself in a situation where the only thing that can get him out of it is not sucking. But regardless, he's in it now. And As expected, it starts off, and it doesn't go well. He immediately shows us that he is even more naive than we expected, and gets screwed over by trusting someone he shouldn't have, and now he's in an even worse position. This starts a major turning point for his character, where we see Kaiji for the first time having to actually take matters into his own hands and fix things. Up until this point, he's been sitting around moping and hoping things will just magically turn out alright. Next game, he's just gonna get lucky and win. Or someone's finally gonna help him and get him out of the mess he's in. This is the point where we see Kaiji finally go, okay, I need to do something smart and crazy to actually fix things. I need to do it. I can't just sit here and hope I get lucky. I can't just hide and it fix itself. Because now he realizes, oh shit, this isn't just my money on the line. This isn't just me having a bad day on the line. Now, literally, it's my life. My life will be destroyed with forced labor and human experimentations if I do not win this. Kaiji is by all means incompetent and lazy. But finally, for the first time in his life, he has something that is so utterly extreme. He finally has a consequence for his actions that is so absurd that it finally motivates him to actually do something about it. And the interesting result of this is we actually see Kaiji start to become really smart. We start to see him use this failure and use a lot of the logic that he used when he was gambling before to find ways to outsmart other people on this boat and beat them in essentially what is just rock, paper, scissors. Another beautiful thing about this series is that aside from one part in the series, part 3, every gamble in the show is a slight twist on something that is already inherently simple. It's usually, except for part 3, not a giant info dump that you have to memorize with random things coming out of nowhere. This is always something simple, and everything that happens is things that you can usually imagine in your head. But what makes it great is the mind games and the interesting ways that they take these simple concepts and make them complicated. Kaiji takes things like this game of rock, paper, scissors, where they're playing with a hand of cards instead of using their hands, so essentially it's a limited resource. And he uses things like, if they have 2 of each card, they're going to inherently try to balance it out so they don't get stuck with one type of card, so I can use that to try to predict what their next card is. Or I can make them think I'm doing that, so they'll guess I'm using this card next, when they never guessed I used 7 scissors in a row. They do crazy mind games and mental loop-de-loops to trick each other into things that should be simple and random, and they make it not simple and random. And each time, Kaiji gets smarter and smarter. However, so do the people he's facing. If you've ever heard somebody say they do well under pressure, then Kaiji is essentially the absolute of extremes of that idea. Kaiji doesn't do well under pressure. Kaiji only does well under pressure. His whole life he has failed. When he gambles, he fails. However, under the most extreme pressures imaginable, this guy who is so lazy and complacent shows that deep down he actually can be quite intelligent and witty and creative. When Kaiji is under the most pressure possible, all of a sudden he finally gets what he never has, and that's motivation, and that's what makes him succeed. Or fail. That's another important thing. This show lets Kaiji fail. This manga lets Kaiji fail. I would say, to give you an average, it's pretty 50-50. It's a coin flip. Kaiji legit just fails half of the time, but these inspire him to succeed the 50% of the time, and the 50% he fails is what makes the 50% of the time he wins important. I won't go too crazy in depth of everything that happens in the rock, paper, scissors part of part 1, because unlike most of the other parts, part 1 has several different gambles. So I'm just gonna kind of go through it. He plays a card version of rock, paper, scissors a lot. It's awesome. There's crazy twists constantly, and it's way smarter and more in-depth than games that are way more complicated. There's more interesting strategy in Kaiji than any episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! This is absolutely absurd. And it essentially ends like it began, with Kaiji getting screwed over. He does everything he possibly could right, except a trait that he carries for the whole series of him just trusting people too damn much. And he gets screwed over because of it. He thinks he finally won. He's finally going to turn his life around, and he fails. This time, not because he's an idiot, but because he's kind. He's in a world where everyone tells him you have to be mean, you gotta be a dick, that's the only way to succeed, and the results just proved all those people telling him that correct. And Kaiji's suffering because of it. But, at the last second, when it seems like he's essentially being sentenced to death, he doesn't fix the situation and get himself out of it, but he essentially manages to get out of this life or death situation with just incredible debt. More debt than he had before. But he's at least alive. Kaiji's greatest talent isn't gambling, it's surviving. If he has unlimited money and he's sitting comfortably, he's gonna lose every game he plays. But if there's stakes that are high enough to where he has to do something to survive, then he will do pretty damn well at it. He might not actually succeed every time, but he will do way beyond what the average person can do at that thing. This guy becomes a super genius when it comes to him having to survive in this scenario, and then does a complete 180 and becomes a useless crybaby when he can get by doing nothing. Part 1 continues on. It has another gamble. It's essentially tightrope walking, but they're on steel beams. Then it has E-Card, which is another card game, which is kind of like rock, paper, scissors, but it's different. It's slightly more complicated, but not by too much. And has a lot of other cool shit in it, but the feeling's the same. It gets more interesting, but the core of it's the same. He has to cross a steel beam without falling off and dying, and he sees a lot of his friends die, and the stakes are even higher because now his life's just objectively on the line. Part 1 is the setup for parts 2 through 6 and onward. Part 1 is exactly that. It's a part of the story. It's the foundation. Part 1 is not a payoff. There's not any big payoff in part 1. I mean, okay, maybe you can argue there is. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to say that there isn't a payoff in part 1. Because part 1 is the tragedy of Kaiji failing to the point where he has to learn to succeed, and then people screwing him over anyway once he discovers his hidden talent for surviving these life or death gambles. And by the end of part 1, he's not only left in bigger debt than he ever even was at the start of it, he's left with a far greater crippling gambling addiction than he ever had at the start. At the start, he was just an idiot who thought he could make it rich gambling. Just doing little games. It was an addiction. Yeah, but it wasn't this level of addiction. It's, he has a little bit of a gambling addiction, he keeps playing games and losing, he's kind of a loser, blah, 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 blah. By the end of it, he's not addicted to just gambling at a slot machine. He's addicted to the high stakes of his life being on the line. He's addicted to life or death gambling scenarios. He is the most extreme case of a gambling junkie in fiction. So now not only is he far lower than he ever was in his lifetime, now he also is so far gone to this gambling addiction that he doesn't see any other way to get out of it besides gambling. And that is the foundation for parts 2 and onward. This guy has essentially cemented himself as someone who, in the right circumstances, is one of the biggest gambling geniuses there is. But lots of people are out to screw him over. And he's easy to screw over. And his addiction is so far deep now that no matter where he succeeds, he will fail again. Because he can't help himself. He will keep succeeding and failing at gambling until he is dead. And that is the foundation and the character that they have built by the end of part 1. Even after his greatest losses in part 1, they never have a moment where Kaiji's like, man, maybe I shouldn't gamble. Because every time he's left thinking, man, if I would have done that one thing differently, I would have won. And then he gets smarter because of it, and then he thinks, because, well, I just got a little bit smarter, I can win next time. Because he thinks the next situation's gonna play out like that one, but because he's slightly smarter, he'll win. And yeah, sometimes it happens like that, sometimes it doesn't. And then he learns from those, but he keeps going. Before recording this video, I never would have called Kaiji Part 1 a prologue. I would have called the first few pages the prologue. Well, the first chapter a prologue. But if you're looking at the series through the grand scope of it, it really is. Because this is what creates who Kaiji is. And this is what sets the ball rolling for everything in the series. For what happens after. Everything that makes Kaiji who he is part 1. Part 1 is the character arc forming Kaiji. The character that from part 2 onwards will follow and see what the result of the tragedy of part 1 creates. This is my favorite manga of all time. There's no nostalgia or special life connection that makes this great. It's just because it's great. It's just relatable because it's written so well, and anyone who has failed at anything or anyone who's had financial trouble will relate to this. It's just phenomenal. This isn't a, hey, I watched this as a kid, so now it has that nostalgia. This isn't like, let's say, I did a video on One Piece, and one of the things that makes One Piece one of my favorite anime of all time is this emotional connection it's built with me over years, this inherent nostalgia for the series. Kaiji didn't need that to be great. I read Kaiji, and immediately I knew this is going to be one of my favorites. The Madhouse adaptation of Part 1 is absolutely flawless. It is the single greatest anime adaptation of a manga I could have possibly expected within reason. Anything beyond this, you would have to be a lunatic to expect. You would have to expect, a limitless budget to expect more than what Madhouse did with Kaiji Part 1, and it is great, and I completely recommend it. But even when watching that, I knew this is going to be one of my favorites. And at first I was worried, because I'm like, well, this feels like it might be my new favorite, but maybe it's just because it's new. I tried to downplay it, like, okay, I just watched this, I'm getting in the manga now too, I should just calm down, it's just because it's hyped, because it's new to me, so I'm probably putting it above some of my old favorites just because it's the newer thing, but no. I waited a year, and I look back on it, and it's like, hey, it's still exactly as good as it was before. No, actually, it's better. Because when I read more Kaiji, Part 1 only got better. Because I saw all the things and the developments in the characters that happened, and it made everything in Part 1 more meaningful. So 100%. If you like anime, if you like manga, you should read or watch Kaiji. Even if you don't care about gambling, I didn't care about gambling before this, but even if you don't care about gambling, you don't care about mind games, and you don't care about anything in this series, watch some scenes of Kaiji and look at some scenes in the manga. Even if you don't like it, you should look up and watch things of this, just because there are so many things in this that are just objectively great characterization, just done objectively great, that you can appreciate it even if it's not your cup of tea. This is something you should look at as an example of how to write characters, an example of art, an example of how things can be great. You don't have to necessarily think it's interesting to look at this and see why, okay, this is why these people think it's great. So if you've watched this video, read it or watch it. And if you already like it and love it, then I hope all of you will stay tuned for my next video, where I'll be covering part 2, and then I'll cover part 3, and 4, and 5, and then I'll wait because part 6 isn't done yet while I'm recording this, but I'll cover every part of this beautiful manga.